Welcome to the Emerging Civil War podcast. I'm Chris Mackowski, and I am joined today, Brady Bunch style, with squares of people. And on my left, I don't know what it's looking like on your screen, but on my left is my heterosexual life mate, ECW co-founder and chief historian, Chris White. Chris, good evening.
Hey, good evening. Thank you for having me, Dr. Mackowski.
And below, holding us both up on my screen, is Ryan Quint. Ryan is a Park Service historian. He lives in Fredericksburg, Pennsylvania, Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Yeah, that's just down the road from where you live.
I know.
Did you just write a book about Fredericksburg, or what?
I put it in Pennsylvania. I don't know that that's going to go over very well.
Good.
So we're going to talk about Fredericksburg tonight, and so I thought I would get the two guys I know from ECW who know the most about Fredericksburg, and I'm going to let them Monday morning quarterback me from the University of Tennessee Press. There's a brand new book in their Command Decisions in the American Civil War series. It's Decision. I love how that fades out. Decisions at Fredericksburg, 14 critical decisions that defined the battle. I was pleased to be invited to contribute that volume. So I wanted to go through the critical decisions and have the two guys I know who know a lot about Fredericksburg tell me if I'm wrong. So, and
Ryan, did you notice that he had to hit the title of his book, because by this point he doesn't even know what he's flogging on this channel?
I know.
I think so, yeah.
It's
well, again,
go ahead.
I'm just concerned that you wrote a book about Fredericksburg. You don't know where it is.
I don't. Yeah, I know. I should tell everybody all they need to know, right?
You know the battle, but you need to know the battlefield. Where did I hear that before? When I took the guide test at Gettysburg.
Everyone take a drink. Chris mentioned the guide test.
So it's funny though, because like I wrote this book and it's been like 2 years since I first, so it's just like, oh yeah, right. And so I'm playing catch up a little bit. So so critical decisions are decisions that are defined as key turning points that change the whole way a particular campaign or battle flows. It's like a point of no return. So there are, other sorts of decisions, important decisions, kind of important decisions, but these are like the critical ones that define the campaign, and they can be operational, they can be tactical, strategic, operational, they can have to do with logistics, they can have to do with personnel. So that's where this list comes from. So the first one that I thought was critical was Lincoln replaces McClellan, and he chooses Ambrose Burnside as that replacement. Chris White, critical decision, good, bad. Do you agree with that or not?
It's easy Monday morning quarterback. This one, it's a decision that needed to be made, but it's just the wrong choice of person. So it's a good, bad decision. George McClellan was not going to carry the war forward in Lincoln's view, at least, the way Lincoln wanted to prosecute the war. McClellan can absolutely build an army. He can supply the army. He can logistically move the army. Does he move it quickly? No, but he can move the thing around. But he is not the guy who's going to land your killing blow on Robert E. Lee's forces, and he's not going to bring home the victories that Lincoln is needing. So yeah, it's a decision that needs to be made. Should it be Ambrose Burnside? Absolutely not. Burnside turns down the job 3 times. If this guy's heart's not into it, why are you going to bring Burnside in to make the command decision? And most people are going to figure I'm basing this off of the fact of Antietam with the Burnside Bridge, and what happened at Fredericksburg. But the truth of the matter is, Ambrose Burnside, up until he takes over the army in that 77-day debacle that is his command of the Army of the Potomac, he is actually an aggressive commander. He's a competent commander. He's not the best commander in the Union stable at that point. But he's a guy who had got the job done down in North Carolina coast. He did okay whenever he came up into the Eastern Theater. His forces served at Second Manassas. Then they're going to serve at Antietam. You can be as critical as you want to be about Burnside at Antietam. I mean, he had to take the bridge for a military crossing. So if he doesn't take the bridge, he's not going to get everything across that he needs. Did he do it the right way? You can debate that, but you have to have a new commander if you're Lincoln. Should it have been Burnside? Probably not.
Ryan, what do you think?
I joked earlier I was going to disagree with everything Chris said, but he said, it sounds good to me. I do think I agree that, when Burnside turns down command of the army twice, and Lincoln says, well, if you don't take it, I'm giving it to Hooker. And then Burnside says, I'll take it because he hates Hooker. you're already stepping off on the wrong foot. I do think it raises the question of, if not Burnside, who? I'm not sure. I'm not sure who else you go with. If you don't go with Burnside, I don't know who you go with. It's really easy for Hooker to always say how much he was going to do so much better than everybody else, and yet, as we know, gets in over his head when he assumes command of the Army. So if it's not Burnside, who? In the winter of 1862 in Virginia specifically. But right, critical decision. Burnside's not in it, but now here he is in charge of a massive army, and he's got to move. So,
and he says he's in over his head, and yet there we go. So he's got to move, and that's critical decision number 2. I think he decides to move to Fredericksburg. He's got the option to keep pushing Lee down the Orange and Alexandria Railroad, which pulls him away from Richmond and away from the capital. He's got a couple different routes that he could choose to get to Fredericksburg. And I say that the next critical decision that is that he moves to Fredericksburg on the north bank of the river. Ryan, is that something you agree with or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to throw my least favorite commander of the entire war under the bus. That's Henry Halleck. Halleck tells him he's going to have pontoon boats. It doesn't matter what side of the river you're going to cross, because he had been promised you're going to have boats. You're going to have bridges to cross the river. And so Burnside's idea to go to Fredericksburg, which had been bantied around by McClellan earlier, Burnside says, hey, it sounds good. It's going to take Lee by surprise, which it does. Gets him a head start, which it does. But everything stops when he gets to Falmouth, and there's no bridges. And that's Henry Halleck's fault. Every day of the week and twice on Sunday, it's Henry Halleck's fault.
Chris, is it Henry Halleck's fault?
Oh, it is absolutely Henry Halleck's fault. Old brains ain't used as brains. And ironically, Halleck is the guy who loves the logistics of Napoleon, and he's terrible at logistics, especially during this campaign. Fredericksburg is a logical choice, because what you're going to do is you're going to give yourself 2 roads to move your men down on a parallel route towards the Confederate capital of Richmond, while being able to supply them over the Richmond, Fredericksburg, and Potomac Railroad, or via water up the Rappahannock if you can open up the Rappahannock. So it makes sense to come down there. Also, you're going to threaten Richmond, the Confederate capital. So what's the fastest way to get a Union or Confederate army to come out and fight you? You threaten the politicians. They're going to start crying wolf, and then out come the 2 armies. And that's whenever you're going to start to see the battles come about. I think at this point, you're looking at a winter campaign. You're dealing with Burnside, who has an army about 40 miles to the northwest of Fredericksburg. So it's either you go down in the Shenandoah Valley, or you move across and head down to Fredericksburg, which is going to give you that direct line south. It's going to give you the logistics that you need, even though Burnside's pretty terrible logistics himself. It's a logical move from a military standpoint, from the operational level of war. And from the strategic level of war, Lincoln is on Burnside's back to bring home a victory. So, our enduring values and beliefs are going to drive our strategy, or our policy drives strategy, and that's going to drive our operational and tactical level of warfare. So that's what we're starting to see here at play. We have not only Burnside's army moving here in the winter of 62, 63, we've got Grant's army moving. We also have William Rosecrans will move down towards Murfreesboro. So, there's a lot of moving parts going on here. Burnside, I believe, made the best decision with what he had available to him at the time.
And ironically, Lincoln is actually pushing him to follow the rail line and get farther away. And, the logistics of supporting that army on that rail line become more and more tenuous. But there's a real push by Lincoln to go that way rather than over to Fredericksburg. I always thought it was ironic that when Burnside gets to Fredericksburg and he needs that infrastructure, he doesn't have it immediately available to him, in part because he's the one who destroyed some of the railroad stuff coming out of Aquia Landing. So he's got to then go back and repair stuff that he himself had destroyed a few months earlier.
Yeah, the other railroad you're talking about, the Orange and Alexandria, just doesn't have the capacity to sustain the army of 123,000 men, or 119,000, or 110,000, whoever numbers you use. And I don't know what you used in your book for numbers wise. So you just don't have that logistical, that string there. When you come down to Fredericksburg, you have multiple roads. You have the railroad, you have the deep water port at Aquia. So you have more options. I mean, and an army is only as good as its general, is only as good as its logisticians. I think logistics are really overlooked in the American Civil War. A lot of command decisions have to be made at the logistical level before you even start moving an army down the road.
Yeah. In fact, Burnside has to bring in the quartermaster General Montgomery Meigs and railroad expert Herman Hopp to back him up on that logistics thing. To be like, look, we can't supply this army if we go down the Orange and Alexandria. So that helps him make that case. All right. So next critical decision: Robert E. Lee defends Fredericksburg. So Burnside gets the jump on Lee. Lee's got to figure out how to respond. He sends half of his army down, actually toward the North Anna River as a defensive line, and then a portion of his army over toward Fredericksburg as a delaying action. And then he still has Stonewall Jackson's corps off in the Shenandoah Valley. So as he's got all these moving pieces, he decides in the end, I'm going to make my defensive stand at Fredericksburg versus other options. Kris, is Fredericksburg his best option?
Well, if you're the delicate genius, to quote George Costanza, that is Jefferson Davis, yes, because you want to defend as much of the Southern Confederacy as humanly possible through your cordon defense and your offensive defensive strategy. So what he wants to do, what Davis really pushes Lee to do, is to keep the enemy as far away from Richmond as humanly possible. If Richmond falls, the Civil War is not over, but there are some real problems for the Confederacy. You're going to be looking at rail lines coming in and out of Richmond. You also have foundries down there, Tredegar Iron Works specifically. You have the arsenal on Browns Island is creating, small arms for the Confederacy or bullets and different things like that, shell casings. So there are some reasons to do it, but Lee wants to defend the North Anna. He feels that that's the best solution. But being a good commander and, not being Joe Johnston, he listens to his president and he moves forward and moves up to Fredericksburg and defends that Fredericksburg line. I mean, obviously we can say it's a great decision at the time, and it does keep that Rubicon, as it were, of the Rappahannock between the two armies for roughly 6 odd months before they head up north to Gettysburg and come back to the area. So, it's Lee listening to his commander-in-chief. It's him making the best out of a bad situation. But, one can argue that Lee's not going to be able to land a killing blow at Fredericksburg the way the battle plays out, because if he crosses out into the killing fields that Burnside just came across, he's just going to be in that new situation that Burnside was just in. And if you look at it, he's lambasted in the press after the Battle of Fredericksburg. A lot of people are like, oh yeah, everybody look at Robert E. Lee's great, Stonewall Jackson. No, they're actually ripping him apart. In some of the southern press, because he's not landing that killing blow that he's always looking for on the Army of the Potomac. So, it goes back to, I think, decision one. I think it's a good, bad decision. Yes, it keeps that line farther to the north, but that line farther to the north away from Richmond. But at the same time, you're tying the hands of your principal commander in this theater, as well as your best commander in the war, to do the bidding of a guy who really shouldn't have been a strategist for anything, and that's Jefferson Davis.
Ryan, does Lee have any other options, or is that his best choice?
It's his best choice because his commander-in-chief tells him to, right? As Kris has already said, Lee doesn't want to fight at Fredericksburg, but when your commander-in-chief tells you to do something, you do it. It just worked out really well that with Burnside stuck on the other side of the river, Lee can gather his forces, right? Jackson's not going to arrive around Fredericksburg until early December. And so it's this multiple day delay that allows Lee to kind of waffle. Do I want to defend Fredericksburg? Do I want to defend the North Anna River? And Jefferson Davis to find out. And had the Union Army not been stuck on the far side of the river, Lee doesn't get that tactical latitude, but he does. And when his commander-in-chief tells him to defend Fredericksburg, he heads to Fredericksburg. Longstreet's corps is going to show up first. They're going to occupy the heights outside of the town. They're going to picket the town itself, and then Jackson shows up. So it works out well in the end. But as Kris said, earlier, Lee is getting increasingly frustrated himself because he can't quite find a way to strangle the Army of the Potomac. It's especially going to come out at Chancellorsville when he says, we can't keep doing this. They keep getting away. And so Fredericksburg is another one of those battles that's going to be, we just fought, but what did we actually accomplish?
One of the things too that is funny, if you look at Lee's correspondence in those first couple of weeks, he's always sort of hinting to Davis, like, I can fall back to North End if you want me to, hey, if you need me to, and it really seems like he preferred that as a defensive line, but paying attention to those politics, he's really got to follow up on Fredericksburg.
Well, it's Davis tying the Johnston boys' hands in 1861 and early 1862. Defend as much as humanly possible. We don't have enough people to do it. Should we mass our defenses here? Should we have a thin line of defenses there? Should we have fortifications? I mean, it goes back to the whole the Southern. Neither side was good at coming up with a strategy. What is going to put the salve on the wound for the Confederates is the fact that Lee wins a lot in the Eastern Theater. So that's going to kind of keep the eyes in the East versus looking out west. Like, man, things are not going well out west. No, all is well. Look over here.
Pay no attention to those armies behind the Appalachians.
Yeah.
So Lee gets to Fredericksburg. He blocks the way. Burnside stuck on the other side of the river with no pontoons. He's looking at his option. He looks upriver. And in fact, Joe Hooker wants to cross upriver. Joe Hooker eventually will for the Chancellorsville campaign. But Burnside nixes it, looks downriver. There's maybe some options, but the banks are really tough to either get across the river or get out of the river. And so eventually Burnside decides to cross at Fredericksburg, which is my next critical decision. Ryan, of the options available to Lee, crossing at Fredericksburg, what do you think?
It's the best spot in a bad case scenario. As you said, north of the river, not only are the banks ford, the U.S. ford, are they underwater, but you also have the fall line of the Rappahannock River, so it's all rocky and nasty. You can't go that way. And Lee's left is tied into the river anyways. You head south of Fredericksburg, the river widens exponentially. And so if you have enough problems building a bridge where it's narrow at Fredericksburg, you're sure as heck going to have a problem building it where it's even wider. He tries, right? He tries on December 5th to go to a place called Skinker's Neck, tries to get the U.S. Navy involved, but those gunboats get driven away. And when the infantry arrive, it's too late. And so to act like Burnside just threw his hands up and said, I guess we're going to cross at Fredericksburg. He does look around, right? He sends engineer Cyrus Comstock. He sends engineers like Wesley Brainerd to scope out the river, try to find me a crossing. And they keep coming back to his headquarters saying, yeah, boss, sorry, Fredericksburg is the best spot. And so again, Fredericksburg gets a lot of flack, and I guess I'm just a glutton for punishment because I like to defend Burnside. It's not like he just says, I guess we're crossing here. He does look, and at the end of the day, Fredericksburg, the crossing in Fredericksburg, the three locations are the best he's going to get, and he's got to go, right? He's been told to do something before New Year of 1863 because Lincoln is signing the Emancipation Proclamation come hell or high water. You got to do something. And by December 11th, you are running out of time. So you got to do something. So he crosses the river.
Chris, good choice.
Oh, it's a terrible choice. But, he really had two choices. It's tell the president, no, we shouldn't, prosecute this campaign. But as Ryan said, it's come hell or high water. This is where the policy is driving the strategy. I mean, this is where the rubber meets the road in Leadership 101. This is military staff rides that we stand out on the banks of the Rappahannock River and talk about. This is the political gains of trying to win a victory where, we're at the point of, we would say today, we're out of options. We are not going to move forward your political gains by attacking here at Fredericksburg in the Kobayashi Maru. We're almost in a no-win situation. Go back to Star Trek.
Points for that reference.
Yeah. So as you sit there and you look at it, that's Burnside's option, but he kind of turns to Lincoln and he's like, all right. And I've always paraphrased it out there. It's like, we're going to attack here because it's going to be so stupid that Lee's not going to think it's coming. That's essentially how he words it. If you read between the lines, when he writes back to Lincoln, he's like, this is going to be so stupid. He's going to be surprised. And it's like, yeah, okay. I mean, he does. He looks up and down the river. We go back to the logistics, which are going to drive this campaign. We have winter storms coming across the Rappahannock River Valley. It dumps 4 inches of snow at one point. It's going to rain. It's going to get warm. It's going to get cold. Roads are turned into mud. You got to move 100 and some odd thousand men plus horses, mules, material, anything across it. I mean, you're going to chew up these roads, and they do it in January of 63 in the Mud March. He, Burnside, like Lee, is listening to his commander in chief, and he's being a good soldier. He's executing the orders. He chose the best option out of 3 just terrible options. I can get across here at Fredericksburg. I can mass my army. I can try to turn them away from their capital, and in the Geminian terms, I can get on the inside track. I can, use exterior lines to eventually put them on exterior lines where I'll have interior lines. It doesn't work out, no, but again, we have two commanders who are put in bad positions by their commanders in chiefs. Burnside's was just poorer than Lee. Lee in this case, I think, in a big way gets lucky because of the terrain at Fredericksburg.
So Burnside then decides he's going to cross. And up to this point, Lee's unsure what Burnside's up to. Lee is as flummoxed as Burnside is about what Burnside's going to be up to. But when Burnside starts to make his river crossing, I think the next critical decision is that Lee lets him. He lets him commit to that plan before doing anything about it. Kris, is that a wise choice, or should he have scared Burnside off?
Well, it depends what the ultimate goal is. If the ultimate goal is to keep the Union as far out of reach of Richmond as possible, you defend the riverbank, and you defend it vehemently. If you want to destroy the Army of the Potomac, you need to put them into a no-win situation, and that's exactly what Robert E. Lee wants to do. It's the Western way of war thesis. So he's going to allow them to come across, and he's going to allow them to try to dislodge him from a very strong position, and he's going to allow them to make attacks out of a city, which is difficult, across open fields against a fixed fortified position. Lee has the advantage. He knows he has the advantage. He wants to destroy the Army of the Potomac. That is his ultimate goal here within this campaign, the Chancellorsville campaign, the Gettysburg campaign. That's what he does at Gaines's Mill when he makes an assault with 50,000 men trying to dislodge Fitz-John Porter. So, this is stereotypical Lee. He's swinging for the fences. So within his purview of the war, he made the right decision. And of course, we know it plays out that Burnside is defeated with large casualties, but that's what his goal is to destroy that army. Now, if it's Jefferson Davis's goal, just keep him away. He failed to do what Davis wanted to do, but he executed what he thought was best for the army at the tactical level.
Brian, is it wise for Lee to let Burnside start coming across that river?
Yeah, you're basically lulling him into a trap, right? If you're Robert E. Lee and you're standing on top of Telegraph Hill, you know that A, Burns needs to cross the river, B, get through the town, and then C, attack across open fields, both at Maurice Heights and Prospect Hill. The other thing that Lee is tasked with or faces the dilemma of is he doesn't know where Burnside's going to cross. And so even if he had wanted to defend the river, he doesn't know where the crossing is going to happen. And so he can't stud the riverbank for 20 odd miles. He has to wait to see where Burnside's going to deploy. And so even if he had wanted to, he wouldn't have been able to put numbers to contact. And so he lets Burnside cross, right? We're going to get to it in a second, but he does put some forces in the town itself to delay the crossing. But ultimately he's saying, okay, fine, you can have the town. Because then you're going to come out of the town and then you're in my field of vision.
And as you mentioned, he put some troops in town. William Barksdale's brigades down there with sharpshooters, Mississippians, trying to contest that river crossing. And originally it's supposed to just be harassing fire, created delay. But Barksdale makes the decision to actually stay in the town and fight block by block, even against orders where he's told to pull out. And that was the next thing I identified as a critical decision was Barksdale's decision to defend the town. Ryan, how does that play out? Is that a smart choice or not?
Gets a lot of guys killed that probably didn't need to die if you're William Barksdale. He fulfills his mission as of 5 a.m., right? He orders 2 cannon are fired that sound off across the Rappahannock River Valley, and that tells the Confederate Army as of 5 a.m. on December 11th where the Union Army is crossing. And ostensibly, Barksdale could have pulled out at that moment and said, mission accomplished, check. But he doesn't. He stays in the town and he starts to fight. He lets the engineers get about halfway across the river where there's nowhere to hide, and then he opens fire. So does he have to do that? No, I don't think so. But it's the kind of person that William Barksdale is, right? You're talking about a guy who regularly partook in fist fights on the Congress's floor before the war. talking about a guy who got in so many fistfights. One of them was stopped when his wig fell off, and everyone stopped to laugh at him instead. It's just the kind of person that Barksdale is, right? He wants to fight all of the evil ne'er-do-well Yankees, and this is his chance to do that. Whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, it's a chance to kill Union soldiers. He's going to take it.
Chris, is that wise for Barksdale to just be in there killing Union soldiers?
It's calculated risk, and that's what Lee's army is built upon. Young, he's not as young as some of the officers, young-ish officers taking calculated risks, taking the fight to the enemy. I mean, this is the antithesis of the mindset of the Army of the Potomac. It's the antithesis of Braxton Bragg's army. It's what good leaders like, I hate to say his name, Phil Sheridan, and others are going to allow to do. Let subordinates make critical decisions and back them up when they do it. Grant does the same thing. Sherman does the same thing. So that's what Lee's doing here. What Barksdale does is really a few different things. First off, he's going to throw off Burnside's timetable, and that is going to force Burnside to take an extra day to figure out what the heck he's going to do. Next, he's going to throw off the Union off kilter, and where the Confederates now lurking. This is going to send shockwaves across the Rappahannock River. And this is also going to just piss off a ton of Union soldiers because they're watching their friends literally fight street by street and be shot, killed. I mean, this is what's going to get the ire up that is going to be unleashed upon Fredericksburg. So Barksdale, he probably set the long fuse aflame whenever he starts really stopping these Union soldiers, having this great panoramic of the war where Union soldiers are describing the fighting street by street and they're across the river. So Barksdale, I think, made a wise decision to slow down Burnside. We know in the outcome, this is going to help throw off the timetable. It's going to throw men off kilter. He does get a lot of guys, killed down in the city, but one brigade to slow down 2/3 of the Union Army, that's a pretty good offset. I mean, that's going to be a win-win for just about any delaying action that you can see in the Civil War. I mean, John Buford takes very light casualties at Gettysburg for delaying the Confederate attack, and he's lauded as a hero. So Barksdale's kind of on that other flip side. He'll do the same thing here at Fredericksburg, lauded as a hero, and both really helped to influence the outcome of the long-term battle.
One of the reasons I thought it was so important too is that people forget that only half of Lee's army is in Fredericksburg at this point. James Longstreet's corps. Stonewall Jackson's corps has come out of the valley by this point, but they're spread 25 miles to the south all the way down to Port Royal to try to cover some of those other possible river crossings. So now that Burnside is committed, Lee starts to get an idea like, oh, here's where the fight's going to be. I've got to concentrate my army. And Barksdale basically buys Lee a full day in which to start to get his act together. But Lee kind of squanders that. He still sort of wonders, maybe this is just a feint. Maybe Burnside's moving downriver. So he actually doesn't call Jackson right away. And I think the next critical decision that I've pointed out is that Burnside then spends a whole day trying to figure out what to do. Rather than crossing his army right away and attacking, he pitters away his advantage. Chris, is that could Burnside have done something different in those circumstances?
I'm actually surprised it took you this long to mention Stonewall Jackson. Wow, this is a first. This goes back to the misuse of Union Cav. The Union Cav should have been used more appropriately, not only by Burnside, but by other commanders, including McClellan. We have capable officers. We have men like George Baird with the Army who can, at least get across the river and scout in detail to see what's going on. Now, they're probably going to draw the guns of Lee's army, but that's at least going to show you the positioning. Even if they draw fire from Maurice Heights, or if they draw fire from Prospect Hill or any other parts of the line, that's at least going to expose the enemy lines. So Burnside coming across, I think what we start to see is a critical command decision that we haven't talked about, and I don't think we'll talk about, and that's the fact that we're going to break the army up into grand divisions, which was an idiotic way of wielding the army. That is going to muddle the chain of command, and that is going to throw an unnecessary level of of problems of having to go from, oh, I got to talk to this guy. Well, no, I got to talk to this guy. Well, no, orders got to come through here. I mean, that creates a real big problem within the Army. So I think what you're seeing with Burnside is a guy not properly using his recon elements that he has with him, and then also not trusting himself. He starts putting together the plan. He's going to listen to his officers on the ground, which is a good thing. He's going to listen to William Franklin, who's in charge of the Left Grand Division. He'll listen to like, we should attack down here. But it takes him so long to formulate a plan. And as our friend Parker Hills likes to say, that window of opportunity is closing. Once it's shut forever. And that's what's happening here. Lee's army is starting to converge completely on Fredericksburg, and Burnside's in the dark.
Ryan?
Yep. I mean, they're on the 11th, the lower crossing, so is finished first, and that was outside of the city, and you could say that a more aggressive commander could have funneled more soldiers over the lower crossing as opposed to waiting for the middle and upper crossing. But yeah, I think Burnside isn't quite sure what he wants to do, right? He's hemmed and he's hawed and he says, I don't want the job. Well, now he's committed to the battle, gets across the river, and then he has to figure out how to break through the enemy lines. It's a tough situation. And even if he had been quicker, I think you still run into the problem of the Confederates are on top of Marye's Heights. You got to knock them off somehow. And so I think a day is not too bad in the grand scheme of things. You're trying to go, the largest army in American history across the river, and trying to figure out, okay, where do we want to attack? How do we want to attack? You get your cannon and your wagons across, so it's tough. But he tries to keep the ball rolling.
So he finally gets the army across. He comes up with a plan after dithering for a while where he's going to attack both the northern and the southern ends of Lee's line with an attempt to try to either break through at one end or the other and then use a military road that the Confederates had constructed to kind of sweep up or down the line. So these essentially simultaneous attacks. But he's late in getting his orders to his subordinates. He tells them verbally that he wants them to attack just before dawn, but orders don't arrive in written form until after dawn. And in the south end of the field, William B. Franklin gets these orders and can't make heads or tails of them. And rather than ask for clarification, rather than telegraphing back to Burnside, he executes the orders in perhaps the most cautious way possible, which throws off Burnside's plan. So my next critical decision really is that Franklin decides to execute this order without getting clarification. And that really is going to affect how everything on the south end of the field goes. Kris, what should Franklin have done?
I don't know if it was Ryan's turn to go first or not, but Franklin is in an interesting position. Franklin is reading the letter of the law. I mean, he's an engineer. A lot of these guys are engineers. That's what they teach at West Point. They don't teach you how to be a general. They teach you how to be an engineer. But he's in the interesting position because prior to the battle, essentially, Henry Halleck is going to say something to Franklin along the lines of, we came for Fitz-John Porter and you're next, meaning that they're in the midst of leveling charges against Fitz-John Porter for actions or inactions, right or wrong, at the Second Battle of Manassas or Second Bull Run. And now you have the general-in-chief turning to you and saying, hey, man, your head's on the chopping block next. So you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, if you're William Franklin. So if you start sending it back up the chain of command, now you're going to start looking like Fitz-John Porter, dragging your feet. And then if you do attack and it fails, you're kind of screwed. But if you break through, all right, everything's cool. So Franklin not going up the chain of command is another one of these good bad decisions. Probably Franklin looked at it in the short term like, I'm going to save my career. I'm going to make sure there's not a paper trail, and Halleck's not going to have as much to work against me with. And then on the flip side of it, he's not doing right by his subordinates. He is not doing right by the army. He's not doing right by his commander by not asking for clarification of the orders. Essentially we go from attacking with 60-odd thousand men, which you wouldn't have attacked with all of them anyways. You want to keep a reserve, but down to an attack force of about 8,000 men, with the rest of them just kind of sitting there on the banks of Rappahannock going like, good job, guys. Go get them. So you turn the bulk of the left wing of the army into a bunch of cheerleaders who are just sitting back watching the show, or spectators, either one. So yeah, I mean, I think that him attacking, is Franklin doing some self-preservation. So
Ryan, how do you see it?
Took all my thunder. Yeah, the Fitzjohn Porter trial is huge. Franklin, knowing that Fitzjohn Porter was getting his career ended essentially by a bunch of radicals in Washington and by an army court-martial, Franklin says, "Fine, here are my orders. Here's how they're written. This is my get out of jail free card. No one can give me a hard time because this is what the order says. And if I am going to attack, I have to attack now, because the fog is burning off. And the longer we wait, and the longer I sit around, it's going to get worse. So rip the Band-Aid off, send forward these divisions." And Franklin does, Burnside's orders say send a division at least to seize the heights beyond Captain Hamilton's Crossing. Franklin sends forward 2 divisions. And so in Franklin's mind, he's saying, hey, I'm doing twice as what you asked, right? You asked me to send 1, I send 2. And so almost in a way, he's both covering his own career, and if anyone really pushes him, he says, hey, I did twice what you asked me to do. So Franklin's kind of doing both pots.
And it is a terribly written order. I mean, I use it in my class as an example of how not to write something if you're looking for clarity, because it's a terribly written order.
It's predicated on a wrong map, right? Burnside doesn't have the right map. And when your map is wrong, everything is going to follow that.
Or not, as the case turned out. So my next real important decision, critical decision that I identified, was John Pelham, who comes out from the Confederate horse artillery, sets up a lone cannon to begin with, and starts harassing Franklin's men as they begin advancing. And that really changes the nature of how that assault goes forward. Ryan, do you think Pelham's gallant action on the south end of the field is a critical decision?
Yeah, it's certainly going to slow up the Union attacks, right? And it's actually really cool kind of how the sausage gets made. The park is doing some research with the help of a really helpful and really smart volunteer. There may have been more guns down there than we thought. There may have been more than just one. And I can't really speak to it right now because we're still in the research phase and I don't want to give any wrong information. But whether there was 1 gun, 3 guns, 4 guns, the very act of you are taking on the entire left flank ostensibly by yourself, there's a reason that Lee says it's gallant to see, or it's great to see gallantry in one so young. Pelham's cannon, 1, 2, 3, doesn't matter, eliminates an entire division of infantry, right? Because Abner Doubleday's division peels off to go see what all this nuisance is. And so you're eliminating an entire division of infantry with a cannon. Pelham's able to do that for hours. And every time he fires, he falls back on the knoll and he pushes it back up and he fires. And it's going to allow the 24th Michigan to get their first test of combat and get the seal of approval from the rest of the Iron Brigade when they drive forward to help push away some Confederate skirmishers. But yeah, Pelham is throwing a monkey wrench in the plan from the very beginning of the action. And no one is quite sure how to deal with that because no one can see him because the cannon keeps retreating back into the little knoll of protection. So good for John Pelham, I guess.
Chris, you had mentioned earlier about, Barksdale's 1 brigade stymieing 2/3 of the Union Army, and you saw that as a pretty good numerical exchange. And, as Ryan articulates, 1 cannon takes out a whole division. Sounds like a pretty good exchange there as well.
Yeah.
No, actually, I go with Marsh Robert with the rest of his quote when he says that he opened too soon. Because Doubleday, it didn't matter. Doubleday wasn't entering the fight regardless. We're only committing Meade and we're only committing Gibbon. Abner Doubleday is worried about the artillery in front of him, yeah, but he also has to deal with Jeb Stuart's cav that's down on that end of the world. Really, Pelham, all he does is slow up the slaughter. The outcome to me has already been written. They're going to attack across those fields. Stonewall Jackson has his plan in place. They're going to cross that 800-yard threshold. They're going to open up with their cannon. They're going to have an artillery duel. So all Pelham did was play their hand a little bit early. So I go along with Robert E. Lee that Pelham absolutely opened too soon. If the plan was going to be throw forward that entire First Corps, if that plan was going to be throw forward more of the left Grand Division, yeah, totally. I would agree that with Ryan. But in this case, I think that Pelham put on a nice pyrotechnic show. We got some great quotes out of Charles Wainwright and some other gunners down there. But outside of that, that's about all we get out of John Pelham. And of course, we get a painting of him sitting with his leg across the pommel of his horse by Mark Kunzler.
and Lee actually put that on Stewart, not on Pelham, for opening too soon. You know, as Stewart is the commander there, Lee felt that Stewart should have withheld that order just a little bit sooner.
Yeah, maybe Robert E. Lee should have been a little harder handed with some of his subordinates. Just saying, they might not know how to ride around a moving army.
So as the attack unfolds, the Federals actually break through. George Gordon Meade's division punches through. They start to peel down the Confederate line. And Jubal Early, who is actually ordered to march to one part of the battlefield, hears the sound of the guns and instead marches to the fight. And I count that as the next critical decision. Jubal Early sort of disobeying Stonewall Jackson and going into the fight. And I am out of order, so I'll go back to Ryan so I can get myself back into order here. Ryan, is Jubal Early doing the correct thing here?
Yeah, absolutely. Jubal Early weighs his. It's a perfect flip, right? You've got Union commanders worried about their career, right? Whether it's Franklin or whether it's going to be David Bell Birney. We'll get to him in a few minutes. Jubal Early weighs his career in like a fraction of a second because Jackson has told Early to move off and help with something else. But Early doesn't do that. When A.P. Hill asks for help, Early says, fine, let's do it. And Early's counterattack is what pushes Meade back because Jackson had misread the situation, right? And I think that's why, going back for a second, why Doubleday peeling off is important. Because when Doubleday peels off, Jackson thinks that that's an end around flank march. And so he orders his nicely prepared defense and depth position all out of whack and sends a bunch of his Confederates on a wild goose chase trying to answer Doubleday's division. But Early's division remains, right? Tolliver's division is leaving and D.H. Hill's division is leaving. Early stays, ignores the order from his superior commander, and instead goes to the assistance of A.P. Hill. And that's going to make the difference, right? Early's onslaught crashes through Meade's men, which to Meade's guys' credit, they've already suffered high casualties. Their ammunition is low. They've lost, their brigade commanders. One of them is dead. Another one's trapped under his horse. And so Early's counterattack slams these guys right in the face and pushes them back out. And so you can really, Early stabilizes the line long enough for Jackson to realize that he has terribly misread the situation and start to funnel those same troops back to help out the fight.
Chris?
Jackson stinks on the defensive. I don't care where you are. Jackson's terrible on the defensive. Who are we going to blame this week? Oh, look, A.P. Hill's here. So Early already has cover because A.P. Hill's there. So whatever he does wrong, Hill's going to get the flack for it. Just read the letter of Hill to Stewart the month before the battle. But, it's Jubal Early he made the right decision at the right time. This goes back to the calculated risks of the Army of Northern Virginia. I still disagree with Ryan that Doubleday did anything. But
he didn't even invent baseball.
Seriously. But he does kind of get screwed over for that first day at Gettysburg because he did a pretty good job there. But no, getting down here, we start to look at the nuts and bolts of it. This goes down to, like Ryan mentioned, these are guys who are more worried about their career than the ultimate outcome of battles on the Union side. And then you flip to the Confederate side, and I'm not saying they're firing on all cylinders because they're not. I mean, there's a lot of problems within that Confederate command, even down on the regimental level, where they're not working and functioning well. But when, the rubber meets the road, they did exactly what they needed to do. They made the decisions when they needed to. And Jackson, for as many faults that he has as a human being and as a commander, he was really good at allowing subordinates, when they made the right decision, to get away with it. Now, if they didn't make the right decision, or they made Stonewall look bad, or if he loses a battle and needs to blame somebody, that's whenever he throws his temper tantrum. But Early made the right decision at the right time. And that's where I think, Lee's army, up until it starts bleeding itself white, does very well. They're able to make the critical decisions, allow those junior officers to make the critical decisions. As Ryan brought up, here's David Birney on the Union side not making decisions. He's putting that kink in the chain of command and saying, I don't fight for this corps. I'm not going to send my guys forward. But on the same time, here's Early. I should be doing something else, there's the critical point. I'm going to it.
Yeah. And Ryan, you had alluded to Bernie a little earlier, and I think that Early and Bernie are like night and day in the same coin, or opposite sides of the same coin, where you've got one division commander on one side who is in this critical moment, and he thinks boldly and really comes to save the day, whereas the other one is thinking very timidly and not. I want to give you a chance just a second to sort of respond to Bernie, and since you brought him up earlier, and how do you compare that situation with Early and maybe not responding with aggression and boldness?
Yeah, I mean, Bernie is just wrong person at the wrong time. He has no formal military training. He comes from an abolitionist family in Philadelphia, which is where their political clout comes from. And at the supreme moment of maybe the Union Army can wrangle out some sort of a victory at Prospect Hill, here comes Bernie. And so when Meade asks Bernie for support and help, and Bernie says, "Hey, we're not in the same corps. Find me a corps commander to give me this order, and then maybe I'll help." You can't be doing that, I mean, yeah, there's a right place and a right time for chain of command, and then there's a time to just grab life by the what and just go for it. And here's Bernie's entire division that is right there, ready to go, and they miss it by just a few minutes. So you think about other military commanders who are industrious and willing to make that calculated risk, and switch them out with Bernie and see what happens. But Bernie is wrong person, wrong time, wrong place, wrong everything. Not saying he doesn't do good things later in the war, but at Fredericksburg,
not the guy.
Not the guy.
And ain't that the irony of the Third Corps? They had the two hardest fighting division commanders as of September 1st of 1862, in Phil Kearny and Joe Hooker in the Army of the Potomac, and then Hooker gets bumped up to higher command and Kearny gets himself killed. So, I mean, and now we're dealing with George Stoneman, Dan Sickles, David Birney. I mean, we've gone from some hyper aggressive commanders to I don't know what the hell they have.
And a lot of this falls on John Reynolds, who is invisible on this part of the field at this time in the fight, someone who could make those orders. But the next critical decision that I identified was that Reynolds decides to direct his artillery. And Kris, you've talked very eloquently about how that's just a bad choice, because Reynolds is a corps commander, not an artillerist at this time.
John Reynolds, Albert Sidney Johnston, Joe Johnston, A.P. Hill are probably the four most overrated commanders of the American Civil War. Now that we've had a lot of people tuning out, I'll keep going forward.
There's a podcast for us.
Yeah. John Reynolds, he always demotes himself. I don't care where he is on a battlefield. He's going to demote himself from a left wing commander down to a regimental commander, or maybe a brigade commander, when he gets himself killed at Gettysburg. And he got himself killed at Gettysburg. He shouldn't have been where he was. He didn't need to be out there. Buford knew the situation on the ground. Whenever you look at him at Second Manassas, he's going to help to try to rally the troops, which, from time to time, a commander should be doing this, but he takes himself down from a division level down to, again, a regimental leader. He's going to do the same thing here at Fredericksburg. He demotes himself from a corps commander down to an artillery battalion commander. He has Charles Wainwright for that. Wainwright's not a militarily trained guy, but man, he's a pretty damn good artillerist, and he has some really good gunners under his command. So Reynolds, time and again, is going to take himself from where he should be down to a place where he shouldn't be. Ultimately, it'll cost him his life, but here at Fredericksburg, it's going to help to cost the battle. Reynolds being on horseback, riding up and down the line, could have sent Abner Doubleday in. Probably not, because Doubleday is the left of the Army of the Potomac at that point, but he can be that intermediary between the Third Corps and First Corps, or between First Corps, Third Corps, and Sixth Corps, which is also to the north, doing absolutely nothing but watching the show. So Reynolds demoting himself, that just really hurt the Union cause there.
Right.
Yeah, I knew when this was going to brought up, I was just going to sit back and watch the fireworks, because and Chris White, it's a ride. And he said it, with all of his pithy arguments, he has said it, right? Reynolds is, it's interesting, because Reynolds getting killed obviously elevates him to almost a martyr status, and it makes him almost impossible to touch, because you can't talk bad about John Reynolds. He's the hero of Gettysburg. And I know he's universally beloved by the officer corps in the Army of the Potomac, but yeah, he just, what do we have to judge him on, right? Fredericksburg, he commands his artillery. At Chancellorsville, he doesn't really do anything.
He takes a nap.
Takes a nap at Gainesville, gets captured, right? Because no one wants to wake him up, which I think is telling, right? When no one says, "Hey, where's the commander?" Recognizes he's still sleeping. That's not great. And so, yeah, I mean, here's a guy who, at the ultimate moment, was really nowhere to be found. Right? You need a voice at the top, and there's no one to be found in the Union Army on the left flank, which is incredibly frustrating for Union soldiers who, let us in, like, let's go, we're ready to rumble, and there's nobody there to give them the order to go forward.
And Reynolds at Gaines's Mill is going to go find an artillery battery when he gets himself lost. So is there a coincidence? I don't think so.
Just
so Meade is repulsed. Bernie shows up just in time to stop a counterattack by Jubal Early, but basically Franklin lets things peter out there on the south end of the field. Meanwhile, on the north end of the field, Burnside is continuing to have Sumner and Hooker attack the stone wall, and he realizes Franklin's not doing his part in the south end of the field, orders him to resume the attack. And the next critical decision I've identified is that Franklin decides not to continue the attack, even though Burnside asks him to. Ryan, I think you're up. Is that the right decision or not?
No, I mean, no. Jackson's guys have been beat down and bloodied, and yeah, they've recaptured Prospect Hill, but they're still in kind of a state of disarray. You can hit them hard and just keep going. The 6th Corps elements of, at least, get deployed into an area known as Deep Run, and there's a firefight between elements of the 6th Corps and some of the Confederate reserves. But there could have been so much more to continue up the fight. By the time the Union Army is repulsed on the left, it's, let's call it 2:30, 3 o'clock maybe. You still have almost 2.5 hours worth of daylight left. And so, yeah, Prospect Hill was a mess. Confederate guns were in disarray. Their horses had been killed. A.P. Hill and Jubal Early are all mixed up. And still, D.H. Hill and William Tolliver are still marching back. And I think that's what's ultimately going to get Franklin canned after the fact, because for all of his hemming and hawing of, I've got the golden ticket, you can't blame me. That's exactly what the Joint Committee is going to do. They're going to blame Franklin because they say, hey, your boss told you to do X, Y, and Z, and you did not do that. So
they show up in town 2 days after the battle to start casting those aspersions. Yeah. Kris, should Franklin have resumed that attack?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I talk about with staff riots down on the south end of the field is fire superiority. The Federals have fire superiority down there. You can look at the number of Confederate guns versus the Union guns, and the numbers at times are close to being equal, but they're not equal in terms of quality of guns. You are going to lose some Union guns along the gun line, either through good artillery fire from Jackson's men or, Mother Nature, the natural breakdown of guns under fire, but they have fire superiority. That's number one. They have they have a concentration of force at the critical point. This is Jomini 101. They still have a massive force down on the south end of the field, and they can hit the weak point of the Confederate lines, like Ryan was pointing out. To make the assaults at Murray's Heights, they're a necessary evil, at least to begin with. You have to keep Longstreet's attention. You can't have him shifting troops from the left to the right. Unless that's your battle plan, unless that is to draw it in, which it wasn't. So you have to be able to do that. But, Franklin did a massive disservice, not only to himself, but to the Army, to every fighting man there, and especially to Ambrose Burnside. Remember, you're only as, an Army's only as good as its leader, and the leader's only as good as his subordinates. The fish stinks from the head, as one of my former bosses used to say. So Burnside will take it on the chin afterwards, unlike a McClellan or a Hooker or others. He does take it on the chin. He does point out, like, hey, those guys suck too, but I'll take the blame. But in the long run, Franklin has fire superiority in the south end of the field. He has men massed near the critical point. And, even though his men were pushed back, the Confederates made counterattacks out into those fields. Like Brian pointed out, they're disjointed as well. So, here is the time to have somebody who's as aggressive as a Jackson or a Meade, who's the finest combat leader in the Army of the Potomac at this time, at the division level, to go forward. That's what you need. And Meade knows it, but no one's there to back him up. I mean, you talk about a chain of command that is just a mess. They make Braxton Bragg look good.
Ooh. So with the Attacks at the south end of the field petering out. Darkness brings an end to the attacks at the north end of the field. Burnside is not successful with any part of his plan, so he's trying to figure out what to do next. And ultimately, he decides not to resume the offensive, and that was the 13th critical decision I identified. Is that a critical decision? Is it the right decision?
So not to attack?
To not attack, to not resume the offensive.
On the Confederate side or the Union side?
On the Union side, for Burnside to, because initially he wants to launch an attack first thing in the morning on the 14th, and his staff officers try to talk him out, and then Bull Sumner's like, listen, we're not going to be able to do this, and that dissuades Burnside from not attacking, and so he decides we're done.
Yeah, I think that's the prudent decision at that point. The command structure's fallen apart to me. The assaults at Murray's Heights have just been an utter bloodbath. Another chunk of the Army's witnessed this or taken part in it. So you're looking at it seriously damaging morale, which is something I don't think a lot of people talk about in the Civil War enough. I mean, they always talk about high morale and all this. But man, the morale of the Army of the Potomac is on a roller coaster. They had they had been to the outskirts of Richmond, then they're pushed back to Washington, D.C., the outskirts of D.C., and they kind of win a victory at Antietam. Then they come down here to Fredericksburg, get the jump on Lee, and then all of a sudden that gets pulled out from under him. It's like Lucy with the football and Charlie Brown. Then they watch their friends be slaughtered. Now you have this bloodbath, and then you turn to the south end of the field and you have this utter cluster dealing with Franklin and Reynolds and Baldy Smith. So I think Burnside made the right decision to get the hell out of Dodge when he did. Now, sitting and antagonizing Lee was dangerous. This is what Lee does in Antietam to George McClellan. I'm going to sit here with a river and creek, a river to my back, and kind of entice the enemy to kind of come at you. I'm not sure that's Burnside's intention, but man, it could have got ugly for Burnside. But then again, it could have got ugly for Lee if he attacked across those fields.
Yeah, we'll talk about that in just a second. Ryan, what do you think?
Yeah, it's absolutely the right idea not to resume the offensive. I'm not a psychologist, but I think it's not a coincidence that he wants to resume the attack with the 9th Army Corps, which was his corps, and he wanted to personally lead it, which leads you to a number of questions. What was Burnside hoping to accomplish? What did he hope maybe would hit him personally? And so you're kind of wondering, like, why do you want to resume this offensive so bad, bud? What are you doing? And so I think when Sumner in this case wakes him up and says, you are still in charge of this army, you need to get us out of this. And Burnside kind of comes back to the earth and says, okay, yeah, let's start to look for a way out. Let's get the wounded across the river. Let's get our supplies back across the river. Let's get everyone back safely as we can. Because you're not going to accomplish anything, right? By the 14th, Jackson has stabilized his line at Prospect Hill. Longstreet's reinforced the positions. Everyone's got new cartridge boxes and they're full of bullets and they're ready to go. You are not going to accomplish anything by resuming the offensive.
And then the last decision that I identified goes back to what Chris was talking about just a second ago. Lee decides not to counterattack because he does have the opportunity. Stonewall Jackson on the south end of the field really pushing for it. He tries a night attack with guys having bandages wrapped around their arm to identify themselves. And Lee says, no, we shouldn't do this. Ryan, is Lee correct in holding his position and staying put?
Yeah, I think so. It's not worth the risk to try and attack off of the hill of Murray's Heights and then you get churned to pieces, because Ambrose Burnside still had a hell of a lot of artillery on Stafford Heights that could reach easily and see any Confederate movement off of the heights. And so any kind of risk out of the defenses and over the field, now you've just flipped the table. Union soldiers can use the outskirts of Fredericksburg to now defend themselves as sniper nests, and now the Confederates are having to not only cross the field but then fight into the city. So I think Lee recognizes that we are not going to accomplish anything good by doing this. So it's probably the right idea to just sit tight. You've just suffered 5,000-ish casualties to almost the 13,000 casualties the Union Army suffered. So take that ratio and see what happens next.
Chris?
To quote the great Albus Dumbledore, it's very easy to do. It's very difficult to do what is right, but it's very easy to do what's easy. So just to go along those lines of Albus Dumbledore, and if you're not a Harry Potter fan, go read it. That's what Lee does. He does the right thing. He does the right thing for his army. Like Ryan said, the artillery up there, and I think this is what people forget about, is the artillery across the river from Fredericksburg, the Stafford Heights, that's Stafford County, just across the Rappahannock. I mean, we're talking, we have a massive amount of artillery that can reach out and touch Marie's Heights behind Kris there. I mean, we're talking about guns that can cover this field. They have ammunition, they have plenty of it. And once the Confederates start marching across the field, I mean, it's a reverse. It's the same thing you're going to start seeing at Gaines's Mill, or you will see it Cold Harbor, you see it Malvern Hill or Pickett's Charge. It's another open field attack. Now, Lee makes a lot of open field attacks. A lot of people are like, oh, look at Burnside at Fredericksburg. Well, it's like, look at Lee at Gaines's Mill, Malvern Hill, Pickett's Charge. Let's keep going. So that's what he does. He comes with these massive open attacks, but at the time, this was the right decision for the Army. And, he gets lambasted. He did what was right, not what was easy. And so he gets lambasted in the Richmond papers. I think something that a lot of people forget about is how we view people today versus how they were viewed at the time. You need to go back and read the newspapers, the letters at the time. What are people saying, at the time? I mean, we make judgments as historians based on, hopefully, evidence-based, facts. And George Rabel, I think, does a really great job in his book, Fredericksburg, that dissects what the press is going to do to Lee, or does to Lee. He dissects them. So he makes I think the right decision for the Army. Keeping the Army together is really his number one goal. Without the Army in Northern Virginia, Richmond can fall and everything else, but there's a lot of psychological elements that are now surrounding the vaunted Army in Northern Virginia. Look at the string of victories he's been putting together, and here's another one. Even though it's not that decisive blow that he wants, I mean, there's a reason that Jefferson Davis on January 1st of 1863 walks out on the steps of the White House of the Confederacy and says, we are invincible, because we won at Fredericksburg. We won at Murfreesboro, a little premature, and we won at Chickasaw Bayou. And he comes out and he says, we're invincible. So, where does that invincibility come from? It ain't coming from Bragg's army. It's not coming from Albert Sidney Johnston at Shiloh. It's not coming from John Pemberton's at Vicksburg. It's coming from Lee.
So, Ryan mentioned those casualty figures a few minutes ago, and people tend to look at that and think like, oh, what a fantastic victory. And they don't realize like Lee was super frustrated by this victory because he knew he couldn't follow up. It was sort of an impotent win. All right. So those were my 14 decisions. There are some decisions that I left out of my final count. I'm sure there are decisions you guys think that I should have had in my account. What do you think I should have included as a critical decision? What do you think I missed? Kris, I'll go back to you since it's your turn to start.
Jimmy Longstreet preparing the Marie's Heights battlefield. Okay. I think he and his artillery, under Edward Porter Alexander, as well as, Thomas Reed Roots Cobb moving his men down into the sunken road, them pulling up a lot of the bridges coming across. I think there are accounts of them putting white stakes out front so that they know the yardage, the pre-sighting of the artillery. I think what you're seeing specifically at the Marie's Heights battlefield is what we would consider a prepared battlefield. The Confederates had the time to do it. They took advantage of the terrain, they took advantage of the time and their expertise by this point of the war. So I think that's a critical decision that is going to make life a living hell for every one of those 30,000 Union soldiers that come out against Marie's Heights.
Okay. Ryan, what do you think I missed?
The November 27th meeting at Aquia Creek that forces Burnside's hand. I'm not sure how you would describe that as a decision, but on the 27th of November, Lincoln meets with Burnside at Aquia Creek. We don't know what they talked about because it was a private meeting. So all we have is Burnside summarizing the meeting to his private military secretary. So you got to take it with rose-colored glasses. But I think Lincoln is kind of doing a good cop, bad cop routine with Burnside, because by the 27th of November, remember, the battle is still 2 weeks away. But Burnside is already expressing, here are all of the problems that I'm facing. And Lincoln, according to Burnside, will say, oh, no, I've got your back and all this stuff. But at the same time, Henry Halleck is in Washington wiring Burnside almost daily saying, you got to go, go, go. And so, again, this good cop, bad cop routine. Lincoln is the good cop, oh, I get it. And Halleck is the one saying, the country looks to you for movement and victory and blah, 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 and all this other baloney. Thanks, Halleck. And so it's this decision made on the 27th of November to almost hold Burnside's feet to the fire, right? Again, your goal is to get a victory by January 1st. Do it.
Okay. So let me ask you, sort of as my last question here, one decision I did not identify as critical was Burnside's decision to create grand divisions. And Chris alluded to this earlier. I didn't think it was a critical decision because I didn't think it was the reorganization of the army so much as who he put where. And then, so I sort of extrapolated that once we got to Franklin at the south end of the field, and sort of that's where that bad payoff comes from the decision. Agree, disagree? What do you think about the grand division structure, right?
It's unwieldy for sure, because you're making an unnecessary middleman. The problem with making grand divisions is that you are almost shoehorning who you pick. It's one thing if Burnside can say, here are my 3 grand divisions, and here are my best friends to command them, and we're going to be a powerhouse dynamic. But the way that the Union Army works and the way that, everything has to be ranked and ordered, when you create these, you're creating the 3 top positions, and almost by default, they have to go to Edwin Sumner, Joseph Hooker, and William Franklin, just by rank of seniority. They kind of by default. Burnside hates Hooker, Hooker hates Burnside, and Franklin and Burnside have an uneasy relationship, leaving you really only Edwin Sumner as a close confidant, and he is old as dirt, and he's 5 months away from a deadly heart attack. So you're not dealing with the best and the brightest in the awesome command relationship, and so it's kind of a mess all around.
Yeah, Chris?
I take it a step farther, and well, number one, with Edwin Sumner, I think that McClellan did everything he could to keep him away from the front lines because he was his second in command for the longest time due to seniority. But I take it one step farther from where Ryan is taking it. Remember, when you start bumping these guys up to another level, that's a trickle down effect. Now you have someone who has to step up and take over a corps who's never been in charge of a corps, then someone who has to take over a division who may never have been in charge of a division, and then up into a brigade. So what you're doing is you're weakening your chain of command. You're not strengthening it. You're not putting the people where they should be at their best and brightest. You're putting Baldy Smith in charge of 6th Corps. And Smith is a hit and miss commander, just for one instance, to take a look at that. We have Joe Hooker, who, he wielded a division pretty well. I mean, he's aggressive. You could say that, he's a good division commander, a bad division commander, depending on what. I like to judge Hooker at the time. He wielded a corps effectively at Antietam until his wounding there. So the guy has skills, and he reorganized the army pretty well. He built its morale. Should he be in charge of an army? Well, he proved to himself that he had been promoted a bridge too far. But that's what you start to do with this chain of command. Not only are you overly complicating it now that you're creating many armies, you're now taking people and putting them into positions where they have never been. Sumner's never been in charge of a mini army before. I mean, the average Civil War general's never been in charge of more than 120 men in their lives before they go off to war. Now, all of a sudden, we've got, Sumner, we've got Franklin, and these guys commanding many armies. And now we have these army corps, which are also many armies, being commanded by guys who hadn't been in charge of them. So you've added that level of command that doesn't work. On the Confederate flip side, I mean, you have massive corps at this point, 40,000 or so in 1st and 38,000 or so in 2nd Corps. But you have 2 leaders who have wielded this many men before. So if it ain't broke yet, why try and fix it? And that's where Lee is. I mean, he's going to make reorganizations over the winter. He's going to do some good work with the artillery. He'll eventually make 3 corps and then 4 corps down the road. But, that's predicated on the fact that Stonewall Jackson dies and he starts to sparse out the army. So in the midst of this campaign, you have a brand new army commander who's now creating a brand new command structure in the face of an enemy. And now you're being pushed by Lincoln to go forward, go forward, go forward. I mean, it's a recipe for disaster.
Good. Fellas, I've had a good time armchair general with you tonight. I appreciate it. So
Yeah, thanks for having me.
I was hoping that you would talk about Stonewall Jackson more. I was very disappointed.
I'm sure that there are going to be people who will second guess all of these decisions, because I don't give a single decision to Jackson. I give far more decisions to Burnside than to Lee. I don't mention about anything really on the north end of the field in front of the stone wall. So there'll be a lot in there for people to parse apart. The book is called Decisions at Fredericksburg, the 14 Critical Decisions That Defined the Battle. It's from the University of Tennessee Press, part of their Command Decisions in the American Civil War series. Chris White, Ryan Quint, thank you both so much for being with me tonight.
Thank you.
And folks, thank you for being with us. We will see you online and on the battlefield.